This is True North Story, the original podcast series. Learn, love, listen, live. Are you ready to discover your True North Story? With your hosts, Tama Fulton and John Hudson Masserol.
Have you ever had the odds stand up so high? You need a strength most don't possess. Or has it ever come down to do or die? You got to rise above the rest.
Anthropology. How did that come about? What was that catalyst for you for studying that in school?
It's such a great question for me to answer because I still to this day loved what I studied. And by the way, I use what I studied almost every day of my life. So it's such a wonderful discussion point. So actually, I think I realized much younger in my life that I really was interested in culture and why people do what they do. Sometimes the crazy, weird, or small stuff. So, for example, I remember when I was in sixth grade and we had to do a study, to the extent that you can do a study in sixth grade,
Right.
We had to do a project, research paper on the Wild West. And so, of course, you had your typical not cases, but typical reports on, whatever or whoever was the main dude at the time, like, whoever was the politician of the day or, whoever was a key cowboy or, someone who conquered new lands or somebody who negotiated some important deal, right? And I was really interested in the fashion of the times. And I wanted to understand why people wore what they wore. And I really didn't think I was going to do that well on the paper. And I was so passionate about it. And I did very well. And I got an A because I really tried to analyze what was going on there. And just looking at what, may seem to be banal or just something we take for granted was actually quite important and reflective of people's values and aspirations and motivations. So fast forward to college, and I still love that aspect of history. I still love kind of understanding culture. I just didn't love like dates and wars and edicts and that kind of stuff. I mean, forget about memorizing any dates. So I was like, well, what is, where can you study this kind of thing? I didn't know there was something that existed in this realm. And then I took a course about Iran and about the revolution. And it was only because I got kicked out of the other course that I wanted to take because there were too many people. So I took the Iran course, and I just fell in love with understanding culture and understanding really what, why people are eating what they're eating and wearing what they're wearing and writing what they're writing. And, it was all an expression of the time and how they were coping with the revolution. And so that led me to anthropology. And so I dug into it, and I just fell in love with it. And I actually then focused on something called economic anthropology, which is really the understanding of exchange. That's what economics really is. So it's the exchange of women, it's the exchange of money, it's the exchange of rice, it's the exchange of ideas. And so that became really my focus of my studies, and it was a blast. It was really fascinating.
That does sound really, really interesting. And you have continued really to, that has evolved to where you are today, but you also are really interested in fashion and culture even today.
I know, it's true. It's true. So the way it's evolved in my life, and it wasn't like I was purposefully doing this, but I just, it led me, one thing led to another. And so, if the study of anthropology is, if you break it down, really, the study of why people do what they do, then when I went into advertising, I became what was called a strategic planner. And in that role, I had to understand why people buy what they buy.
Interesting.
And Yeah, and it's often the same kinds of skill sets that you need to, to uncover this, right? And I often employed PhD anthropologists to help me understand that because they're experts at really decoding the symbolic value of things. So,
sure,
you know,
and
whether
what value people place on it, right?
Exactly, and why they have a role in society and why they have a role in culture. Because, as advertising people, we wouldn't just take things at face value. You drink Coke because you have to quench your thirst. Yeah, but you drink Coke because it has so much more meaning. So what is that meaning? And how do we understand that? And how do we create even more meaning for people given their culture and given their system of values? So I took that for about 10 or so years, well, maybe it was more than that. More like 15 years. I took that understanding of anthropology and weaved it into my role as a strategist. And then when I moved to Google, a lot of what I do now is try to understand why people do what they do in the digital space. And so I run a team there. I run a strategy team there. But a lot of our work is really decoding people's behavior. And sometimes we do that through our data, and we love data. We love kind of looking at it in different ways. And then sometimes we have to go a level deeper. And we've employed anthropologists for the past 5 years that I've been there to decode why people are spending so much time on their phones, or why they have to be on average 3 social media sites. Why not just be on one, right? Or why watch the stupid videos that you're watching? What's going on here? So, that's kind of been like a leitmotif in my life. Now, in terms of fashion and beauty, that's kind of a subset of that, because part of what I really love to do is decode this sometimes seemingly meaningless stuff that we do, right? So, of course, it's very fascinating to understand, people's relationships to health and wellness. I mean, those are big issues. Those
right.
Those are important. But we tend to look at some other things in our lives as frivolous or meaningless, whether it's fashion or whether it's beauty or whether it's like the TV shows we watch. Who cares, right? But actually, if you look at them with a keen eye and you really try to dig in beneath the surface and try to understand why people are willing to spend their time engaging with these topics, you will uncover a whole world. You will uncover so many values and conflicts and interesting assumptions and perceptions of themselves and of others in their world. So beauty and fashion to me, even though I love it as just as a human being,
right.
I also love to look at it as a lens by understanding, or through which we can understand culture.
Wow. Abigail, this is John, Tama's podcast co-host partner.
Hi, John.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
I find that whole thing amazing. I am currently teaching a content strategy course at UW here in Seattle, and Tama is helping me, and we're finding all kinds of interesting stuff. And this is where this whole thing started, because one of the required reading books that I had was the Content Code book by Mark Schaefer, who quoted you in there. And
yes.
I wanted to kind of go into this whole thing that you're talking about, the use of anthropology, and I mean, get it, because so much of his book is like why. And
exactly.
I noticed that in your bio too. When did you first start to embrace the why and want to know more about why, and how does that influence you professionally and maybe personally?
So, I actually gave a speech on this a couple of years ago, and I've been talking about trying to go beyond the what and try to understand the why in my own organization, because so much of my world in tech, but I would say in business in general, focuses on what is going on. People aren't buying my shoes,
right?
Or, sales are going up, or nobody likes my ad, right? So there's a lot of data that reflects on what is going on, and nobody seems to ask why that's happening. Now, I actually, as I mentioned in the beginning, I started getting interested in the why very early on in my life, but particularly about what I call the little whys. So I think the what versus why discussion it's always an important one, and it's always something that we have to reiterate because people still don't always focus on the why.
Right.
But I actually think what I really enjoy bringing to the table is what I call the little whys. So what I mean by that is like by probing into some of the seemingly banal behaviors, the banal what's, right? You can really uncover something powerful and wonderful. And so what I mean by that is when I decode why we watch the funny videos we watch,
right,
it's not just because we want to have 2 seconds of, relaxation. And it's not just because, we just need to crack up for a second. It's actually pretty damn valuable and pretty important. And what I've noticed is that when you reveal why we do everything we do, not just the big stuff, but even the seemingly small stuff, you really can inspire people. You really give them a sense of, wow, what I do is powerful, and every second of my life can be a source of that power.
Wow.
So, for example, one of the insights that we share when we talk about, for example, what I just said, sharing that funny video, that laugh out loud video, we call it energy exchange. And what I bring to light is that one of the ways that you bond with somebody, and we learn this from very early on. We learn this from the earliest days of our life when we're babies, and we smile for the first time at our parents, right? And there's actually a term for that. It's called the social smile.
Right.
We get an immediate reaction from our parents. And what is that reaction? It's a smile back. And so we learn by giving gifts of happiness, we get that much more pleasure in return because we know we're bonded. So then what happens is the more I can make my friends laugh and the more I can give them some pleasure, some heightening, some expression of affirmation, of happiness, the more I know I'm going to be connected with them. And that's pretty damn deep.
It is. And Abigail, I was just thinking, you came from a medical family and how much those connections actually work in the synapses of our brains. They help us physically, emotionally, and socially. It's much bigger, you're right, than just laughing at a funny kitty video. Exactly. And of course, the other thing to note is that I'm not going to send you a video that you'll never understand. I'm going to send you a video. I'm showing you that I know that you know that I know, that yes.
We're going to get this.
That
So
I get you, Abigail, and I'm going to send you something that you will relate to and find funny.
Excellent.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and I see this with, and here's the thing. This is what I try to tell my clients. It's like we are, as human beings, compelled to share these pieces of energy exchange. We cannot hold on to them. Like when my husband sees a funny video, he feels compelled to share it with me, right? So as a result, what happens is then if you're a brand, right, and you're sharing a piece of content that not only has some purpose in terms of explaining the role of that brand, right, but actually gives you some happiness, you're not only going to feel that much more connected to that brand, but then you're going to feel compelled to share that with others, right? Thereby just increasing the brand's power and presence.
This is True North Story, the original podcast series. And now, back to the program.
I must admit, I don't believe in it, but I see how you get sucked in. Shine, shine, shine on. Yes, oh, won't you shine, shine on.
That's super interesting. I mean, that is because that's the one thing I'm trying to get through to the class, and that's why we really wanted Mark's book to be the required reading because of the shareability part. But it's also, you've got to put a little bit of yourself into that content if you want, you know what I mean? If you really want it to resonate in a meaningful way, in an authentic way, in a way that, like you said, launches the content, it's because part of you is in that. And what you were talking about earlier about the shareability, because your husband is compelled to share that video with you, probably because he knows you really well and he knows you're going to engage with that video and you're going to laugh and it's going to be something that resonates with you. But if you can do that in your content creation with your audience, whether it be for the brand or whether, right? Or, I mean, you're off, you're going to be so far ahead of your competition or whatever. I mean, who you know, that content is going to, because Mark talks about this, and I wanted to ask you this too, about this wall of noise, this coming immense amount of content that is going to just explode over the next 5 years and beyond, in terms of how are you going to be able to cut through anything?
So I don't agree that we are going to be barrage. You know, there's going to be this barrage.
Right.
I do think, in other words, yes, there's a ton more content coming at us, but yet we have learned to filter. We have learned to navigate through that over the years to start filtering.
Right.
Some of that filtering, unfortunately, that we don't give some things a chance, but we even come up with better filtering systems. Right. So while we're getting all of this being pushed towards us, we're getting a lot of new systems to help us figure it out. And I, you know, one of the things that is part of my anthropology training is that really we haven't changed as human beings fundamentally in thousands of years. Yep. And so what happens with new technology is we don't change as humans. We learn to adapt and navigate through that technology in order to make our lives better. What is consistent is that we tend to want to make our lives better. That is a consistent truth, and there are fundamental human needs and desires and motivations that technology will help us better express, right? So I think about, you know, the Eskimo has 1,000 words for snow, right? We only have one, right? Because we don't care enough about snow that we've learned to filter that all out. Right. So I think about this, like 1,000 years ago, how a blade of grass was sprouting said so many things to me. It meant what the weather was like. It meant whether that land was fertile. If it was pushed in one direction or another, it meant there's an animal heading in my direction or there was an animal going away from my direction. I mean, there's so many things that blade of grass, there's so much data coming from that blade of grass that I cared about at that time, because I didn't have the means to filter all that other stuff out. Right. But now I don't really care what the blade of grass looks like other than it's green.
Right, because you have an app on your phone.
I've used the right fertilizer. Right. Because all those other things have been taken care of thanks to technology. So our brains have learned to adapt to some extent. Right. So we have had probably some change of, you know, our neurons to some extent, but really we haven't really changed that much. We've just learned to filter out and to focus on different things depending on the needs of our generation.
Right. Have we lost connectivity with each other in the onslaught of new technology, or are we still connecting but just in different ways?
I think yes and. So what I mean by that is we certainly have lost a certain type of connectivity, but just like with all new technologies, as I kind of was alluding to before, we as a species over centuries have had to learn how to change with technology. And sometimes there are negative results of that technology, but for the most part, we've used that technology to the best of our abilities to help us be better at what we do and who we are, right? So, you know, fire, the printing press, metal, right? All of those things, we have learned to use them in the best possible way. Have they actually been used for bad things too? Sure. So the fact that fire can burn things down, that's not so great. But for the most part, 99% of the use of fire is pretty darn good. And you know what? Because of fire, guess what happened? Now we don't have to wear as much fur. Okay, so because we're warmer at night or whatever it is. Like, so someone's going to lose out, but in the end,
Right.
most of the time we have figured out how to make the most of it. So have we lost a certain sort of connectivity? Yes, talking on the phone.
Yeah.
Right? I don't talk on the phone anymore. But and I do miss that to some extent. But for the most part, most of my connectivity now is faster, is more efficient, is more
Would you argue it's less personal, Abigail? More, shorter clipped answers that are, just to the point, just
not necessarily. I
Okay.
think that depends on the type of engagement I want. So that's the beauty of having all these technologies, right? Because in some cases, like when my son texts me and says, "Where's the candy?" I don't have to have a long drawn-out conversation. I can just tell him the candy's in the cupboard. He doesn't need to be more personal than that. And yet, on the other hand, and this is something that was uncovered in the research that Tammy, you were mentioning before, the digital space has given us back a new form of language, what the anthropologists would call poetic language.
wow.
So when the written word came about, it's very cerebral, and you have to learn a certain code, and it's quite dry. But now with digital, if I want to text you the following sentence, let's say you asked me, "How was your day?" In the old days, I would type out, "My day was fine, thank you." You don't have any understanding of the nuance of that. You have no sense of how I feel. But now, thanks to technology, I can respond to you with imagery, with video, with music, with expletives, right? So I can give you
Emojis.
so much more emotion in my response, right? And I can say, "It was so fine, hashtag, a crazy ass day, but still cool," plus an emoji, plus, a funny GIF, right? And then it was damn good, right?
Right.
So I think that actually, in some cases, we've been able to explore a different type of language and therefore have a lot more personal exchange. It's just that now we have the ability to determine how we want to engage. Sometimes it's clipped and short and efficient, and that's awesome. And you want to get something done quickly, that's the best way to do it. And sometimes it's nuanced, it's poetic, it's human, it's highly emotional, and maybe in some ways even more emotional than if you had to do it on the phone, because you're not worried about a response the same way you would if you were talking on the phone. So you can, in some ways, be more vulnerable.
Right.
Oh, for sure.
The word that came to my mind was you can be vibrant now in communication. Because, like they said, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I can send you a picture of the sunset I'm looking at and say, this is how my day has been,
Right.
And it conveys so much more than having a great day, enjoying my dinner, whatever it is that you just say.
Right. Now, do I think it's annoying when we're at, at dinner and everyone's looking at their phones? Yeah. But on the other hand, if I'm on the receiving end, like I have these friends I literally just met. I love these women, brilliant, beautiful women. They're so supportive. Whenever I post anything, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, they're immediately responding back. And it's such a gift.
Yes.
It's such a gift of affirmation and friendship and love. And I'm like, I know you were probably sitting in a meeting doing that and probably not listening to the person talking to you for 2 seconds. But man, thank you.
Yes. You feel validated.
Totally.
What I love about that is you touched on the gift thing, and I just wanted to ask you about this because this was the quote that Mark pulled from you in the book that just really resonated with me when he said, when we see or create an image that enlivens us, we send it to others to give them a bit of energy and effervescence. Every gift holds the spirit of the gifter. And I just thought that really, I'm like, that is powerful. Where did that come from for you? Like that when you give a gift to somebody, there's a piece of you in that gift as opposed to you're just sharing something. It says something about you as well as the person that you're sending it to.
Absolutely. I mean, this is all coming from the same research that we've been doing. We have an umbrella term for all the research that we use when we employ anthropologists, and we call it Humanizing Digital. And that, quite frankly, that was just a working title, and it kind of stuck because people got it, right? And so this was from a study we did on what we called the visual web. We made that term up as well, which basically means static and moving imagery. We just wanted to understand that space.
Right.
And so this is that thought came from this one kind of uber insight that we call the energy exchange, and that we are giving, whether it's a thumbs up or a beep beep on Waze, right, or a retweet, or you're sharing a video, like all of those things are, as you said, Tim, it's an indication of validation. It's an indication of, I see you, I hear you, I like you, you matter, right? And by putting that extra effort, then you are giving a bit of your spirit back to this person, because you're giving your endorsement. Mm-hmm. You're taking the time to read something, to like something, to affirm something. That is part of you.
Right.
For sure. I mean, it's interesting because Tam and I are so trying to, as we build out this brand, and we're doing it organically from the ground up, the True North Story brand. And I mean, it's just been, as marketers ourselves, content strategists, writers, all the communication and messaging media people. I mean, we're kind of, Tam and I are all of those things in a lot of different ways. And it's been a really eye-opening experience because we've gotten to start from ground zero and slowly start to work this. And I mean, we haven't gone out and paid and, had big stuff like that yet. We're just trying to, so we're learning too. And so it's seeing like the affirmational part that you just referred to. Like we see that with people that respond back in some of the podcasts they listen to, that they're like, man, like remember the Barry Friedman one where, Tama brought up the fact of you don't feel like you're good enough or you don't feel like you've measured up. We've all been there before. And we received a comment from somebody who really resonated with them in the podcast. And it was almost like that Barry in that podcast was talking to them, was speaking to them, affirming them and what they felt and who they were. And I'm like, you can pay all you want for, banner ads, but that is the kind of interaction that you want that's going to build your brand and your core audience. I'm thinking.
Yes, I mean, that I agree with that, and I think affirmation comes in different forms. And I think for a long time, marketers thought that was an emotion. I don't want to say emotional because
like a call to action.
No. After the call to action era, if they were somewhat sophisticated, they said, "Oh, we need to dig deep into people's emotional state, and we're gonna tap into the what I would call, the more I don't want to say saccharine, but kind of schmaltzy, emotive, like pull the heartstrings. That's the word I want to use. Pull the heartstrings kind of stuff. As a reflection of we understand you.
Yes.
And I think that was powerful, but I don't think that's the only way to do it. And going back full circle to the humor story, humor requires intelligence, both on the part of the person who is being humorous and by the person who is actually
laughing,
receiving,
exactly.
right? Because all of that is humor is very insightful, and humor forces your brain to make connections.
Yes.
Right.
And so, what you're really doing when you create something that is very funny, and then passing it along to somebody else, is you're recognizing and affirming their brilliance. And that's
like that.
super powerful. And I try to put, there's another insight that we call synaptic play from this research too. And I won't go into all of that, but basically what that's really talking to is the fact that our brains are hardwired to make connections. They want to make connections. They don't want to sit back and be a lazy bum. Our brains want to create these synapses, and the more you're exposed to unrelated, disconnected stimuli, the more your brains will try to make that connection. And that's really what humor does, and that's really what so much of the content that we think of as kind of bizarro is doing. It's making a connection among seemingly disconnected notions or concepts or images. And so what that's doing is when somebody creates that kind of amazing content, he or she is saying to the viewer, I know you're smart because you're going to make this connection. You're going to get it. I don't have to feed you something that is easy and simple to make you enjoy it. In fact, you're going to enjoy it more when you have to actually work at it a little bit.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to say is that to affirm somebody can be the pulling of the heartstrings and, tapping them into their, innermost kind of emotions and conflicts in their brains.
Right.
And affirming that they're smart.
Right. Wit.
Exactly. And so we shouldn't take it for granted. We shouldn't take this stuff for granted at all. And so a great brand can tap these different aspects of humanity and affirm them in many different ways. And to your point, it's not just going to be the hard sell. It shouldn't just be the hard sell.
Well, and this is interesting. I just wanted to ask you this interesting question because I posed it at the end of one of my content strategy classes, and I'm just curious because as brands become increasingly involved in social messaging, environmental messaging, political messaging, as we're seeing iconic brands wade into politics for lesser, right? We heard one this week here in Seattle that we're all familiar with. So, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that from a marketing and a branding and a messaging standpoint. Is that really risky? Is that smart? Is that because we're talking about affirming and building our audience, and when we pick a side or when we get behind a cause, sometimes it's not always a popular one. And is there a risk associated with that for brands and their messages and their audiences?
I have more than two responses, but the two things that strike me with your question is, number one, all brands are at risk of failure if they don't have something to say, if they don't have a point of view.
Right.
Now, whatever point of view they decide, it could be risky, but they're more at risk of becoming
unnoticed. Irrelevant.
Irrelevant if they don't have a point of view. So that's number one.
Right.
Number two, the other thing they have to be worried about is less are they at risk of being disliked for what they have to say than are they at risk of sounding contrived.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of brands who say, ooh, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon now and put myself in this camp or say that or, support this. And you have to scratch your head and you have to ask, well, is it because you actually believe it? Is it
right.
Does it have anything to do with your brand? Or are you just trying to, garner some more attention? And then that really backfires. So I guess that my point in summary is that a brand will be at risk of losing love and admiration and then customers if they are not honest with themselves.
How much of it is the hubris and ego of management saying, to your point, staking out this is where we want to be on this issue or this, or whatever the case may be, versus what is in the best interest for the brand and ultimately for the customer?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that has to be. I do think the latter is where the brand needs to go. But sometimes you need a fierce and fearless leader to take you there because the rest of the organization isn't ready. So
I like that.
I don't think it's one or the other. I think, and I think oftentimes it is the leader who is the voice of the brand, and it's
Sure.
the leader who drives the agenda, for better or for worse.
Right. Well, and to your point about being inauthentic or being contrived, or like, do you think we're living in an era where people are, and I don't want to use the word cynical, I'm going to throw it out there, but that's not, they're just, they can see things for what they are, perception. So you can't get away with tugging on the heartstrings when it's inauthentic anymore.
Right. I almost think we're like in a post-cynical world now.
Okay,
it's almost
right, yep.
like, I was going to say, don't quote me on that. It's too late because I'm obviously on a podcast.
Right.
But I mean, I just think it's like, it's almost taken for granted that you have to be transparent. And I'll say that most brands are not. They're not doing it necessarily, but I feel like the cultural conversation is one of, well, of course.
Right. To you, it makes perfect sense. Right. Yeah. I get it. But
there's still a long way to go. Believe me. I mean, I have these conversations every day with clients or on a big stage. There's a long way to go for them to feel like they can relinquish themselves of perfection and relinquish themselves of a masked, contrived storyline. So it's not to say that there's not work to be done there. It's just to say that now it's less a question of should you be doing it and more how do you do it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Hey, Abigail, if people want to learn more about you, learn more about your love of fashion and all that you've got going on there, because I know you've got a whole lot of stuff going on, how can people connect with you?
I actually have a website. It's abigailposner.com.
Right.
And there you can link into my blog where I post every week. The blog is called Beauty Skew. But I also list out my publications, and there's the videos that I've been in, and also any upcoming speaking engagements. So if anyone's interested, feel free to jump on there and hang out and let me know what you think.
Awesome.
Oh, that's awesome. So great.
Abigail, thank you so much for your time. We sure appreciated talking to you. You're such a vibrant, interesting person. And I just love that you love culture and people and why we do the things that we do, even the silly things. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored.
Thanks, you.
Thanks, Abigail. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
And everything around her is a silver pool of light. People who surround her feel the benefit of it. It makes you count. She holds you captivated in her palm. Suddenly I see. This is what I want to be. Suddenly I see.
Thank you for listening to True North Story, the series. And tune in next time